Most respected teacher, Thai, dear beloved community, today is the 20th of June in the year 2016, and we are in the 21-day retreat in the Upper Hamlet, the Dharma Cloud Temple. The deer roam free in the countryside. The birds fly up to the sky. Things arise from the depth of consciousness. Your mind and the things are not two. A true man or woman know how to live in the freedom of Nirvana. There they roam like the deer and fly like the birds. Your mind, Nirvana, are not two. The last line is not right. I just sat down and made this song, and I haven't got the last line yet, so I'm sorry about that. So, dear beloved community, the subject for our talk today is Nirvana. So first of all, I would like to, or later on we will hear this sung in Vietnamese, very beautifully. So something to look forward to when things get a little bit dry and boring. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the story that Thai tells in the book called The Raft is Not the Shore. So this is a story about Mara and Buddha. And Buddha is making a solitary retreat in a cave. And he is accompanied by his faithful attendant, Ananda. And one day, Ananda is sitting outside the cave, and he sees someone coming toward the cave, whom he thinks he recognizes. Yes, as he gets nearer, he recognizes who it is. That is Mara. So Ananda thinks, oh dear, that is someone who's going to cause problems for the Buddha. And the duty of the attendant is to take care of your teacher and make sure that your teacher is not troubled by bothersome guests. So Ananda thinks this is a very bothersome guest who is coming our way. Because when the Buddha had been sitting under the Bodhi tree, Mara had also come and tried to distract the Buddha. So Ananda needs to use his thinking to how to deal with this situation. So when Mara comes close enough, he asks him, "Hello, Mara, what are you doing here?" And Mara said, "I'm here because I need to visit the Buddha." And Ananda thought of saying, well, actually the Buddha's not here. But he couldn't say that because Mara knows very well that Ananda is the attendant, and wherever Buddha is, Ananda has to be there. So he said, what do you want to see the Buddha for? You are the Buddha's enemy. And then Mara started to laugh. He said, really? I always heard the Buddha taught the Buddha doesn't have any enemies. And so Ananda is really in a difficult situation. So he said, never mind. So he said, okay. So, but anyway, the Buddha may not be able to see you. I have to go in and ask the Buddha if he wants to see you. So Ananda is still hoping that the Buddha will say something like, or the Buddha, in a deep concentration, I can't see Mara. So when Ananda asked the Buddha said, Mara, my old friend, yeah, let him come in. So Ananda thought, oh, okay. And then the Buddha said, and please, Ananda, make some tea for both of us so we can enjoy tea together. And Ananda loved making tea for the Buddha. He could make tea for the Buddha many times every day. But making tea for Mara was a completely different matter. It's something very difficult to do. Yeah. But anyway, attendant has to do what the teacher tells him. So he invited Mara in. So Mara and the Buddha sat down and they had a conversation. And the Buddha said, hello Mara, my old friend, how are you doing? And Mara said, not too well, I'm afraid. Oh, the Buddha said, what's happening? And Mara said, well, some of my disciples, they start talking about practicing mindfulness, walking slowly, doing meditation. And that isn't what Mara is about at all. Yeah. So I'm not doing very well. But anyway, Buddha, how are you doing? And the Buddha said, well, my disciples aren't much better than yours. My disciples, they keep saying things, I said things which I never said. And then they put a lot of bananas in front of me, expect me to eat them all. And in return, they expect me to do certain things for them when they touch the earth and ask me, oh, please, can you help my business to thrive or something like that. And that's really not what Buddha is about. So then the Buddha said, what do you think, Mara? Shall we change places? And you become Buddha, I'll become Mara. And then Ananda was very afraid because he thought that if they change the places, then Mara would be his teacher and he would have to make tea for Mara every day. He didn't want to do that. But anyway, they discuss a bit longer and they decide that Mara will stay Mara and Buddha will stay Buddha. Yeah, so that is the story about Buddha and Mara. This is you and me. Well, it's me anyway. I don't know if it's you too. So this kind of dividing line down the middle. So in us we have Mara. We also have Buddha in us. And this is our environment. And in our environment we have Mara and we have Buddha. The important thing is this line here. Is it a wall that you can't break down? Or is it possible for Mara and Buddha to have tea together? So it's a question that I have to ask myself, because in me there is Mara and in me there is Buddha. And in my perceptions around me there is Mara and around me there is Buddha. And if I say, you just let Buddha get on with Buddha's work and Mara get on with Mara's work, and they just get on with their own thing, but they don't have any communication, then we can't touch Nirvana. So somehow the first thing is for Mara and Buddha to be able to see that if Mara wasn't there, Buddha wouldn't be there. If Buddha wasn't there, Mara wasn't there. And Buddha needs Mara, and Mara needs Buddha. And it's within you, that is true, and all around you, that is also true. And sometimes you touch the space where Mara and Buddha inter-are, and then you are in a position to touch Nirvana. So we all have the things inside us that we don't like. Those things could do with the past or to do with the present. So today when I was walking outside, I heard a little conversation. Well, I think the people having the conversation, they didn't know I could hear. But they were talking about me. So I prick up my ears, and then I heard, one time I had to lead a retreat with Sister Annabel, and she said, I will look after the practice, and you can look after the everyday business of the classroom. So when I heard that, it's like I saw my Mara immediately, so that I can, I do the really meaningful thing, you do just the nitty-gritty thing. So then I look at my Mara, and then I said, hello Mara, I know you are there. And that is what the Buddha always taught us to say. To say to our Mara, hello, I know you're there. And that is the way to make the connection between Buddha and Mara. And when they can be in connection with each other, they can help each other. Buddha can help Mara to transform. If you just let Mara get on with his or her work, and you say, well, Buddha will do all kind of wonderful Buddha work, and the two never help each other, then you cannot really transform at the depths. You will be, in terms that people used to talk about, Buddha will be making a lot of merit by doing Buddha work, and Mara will be making a demerit by doing Mara works. And then in the future you will get the fruit of the merit and the fruit of the demerit, but you won't be able to touch the Nirvana. So that is an important step, to accept all the mud that we have in order to be able to help the lotuses to grow out of it. Yeah, so Buddha can use Mara. And every time we touch the Mara nature in ourselves, it's an opportunity for us to be happy and say, hello Mara, I know I can do something useful with the mud. We have done things in the past. We have had suffering in the past, but we don't have to throw that away. We can use that in order to have happiness in the present moment. We can always build on the past suffering in order to make happiness in the present moment. And last time I spoke about the 3 times, and I said that we practice to see that the 3 times are, that in the present, the future and the past are always there. And maybe you have read the sutra on knowing the better way to live alone. It says, don't be caught in the past. Don't be carried away into the future. The past no longer is. The future has not yet come. We have to know how to live deeply in the present moment. And when we live deeply in the present moment, we don't waste our life. And so we can touch the past and the future in the present moment. So then in that sutra there is something very interesting that is about what is meant by being caught in the past. And when someone thinks about the way his body was in the past, his feelings were in the past, and he is carried away by that, he's caught in that, then that person is being caught in the past. And then it asks, what is meant by not being caught in the past? When someone thinks about the way his body, his feelings, her body, her feelings were in the past, but she is not caught in that, she's not carried away by that, then that person is not being caught in the past. And the same is true with the future. So we have to ask ourselves, how can we meditate on the past and meditate on the future so that we don't get caught and so that we are still practicing? And I think the answer is that as long as we practice mindfulness, concentration, and insight, when we look into the past, then we are not being caught in the past. And whenever we practice mindfulness, concentration, and insight to be in touch with the future, then we are not being carried away by the future. We can only be carried away by the future, our fears of the future, when we are not practicing mindfulness, concentration, and insight. So we always have the right to mindfully, with concentration, look into the past and transform the past by the way that we live in the present moment. And at the same time, we are transforming the future. What we do in the present moment is what makes the future. So the verse that I wanted to sing for you at the beginning, I will write on the board. to help me with the last line? The dear roam free in the countryside. The birds fly up in the sky. Things arise in the depths of consciousness. The mind and the things are not two. A true man or woman know how to live in the freedom of Nirvana. There they roam like the deer and fly like the birds. Their true home is here and now. Okay. So, dear Sangha, this verse is to be found in the Dharmapada in Chinese. You probably all heard about the Dharmapada in Pali. Those verses of all the essential teachings of the Buddha that the monks or lay people, whoever, they put them together in verse so that people could easily remember them. So there's a chapter in the Chinese Dhammapada that is not in the Pali version, and it's called the Nirvana chapter. And this verse, it's Dhammapada 36, the 36th chapter in the Chinese. And this verse comes from the Nirvana chapter, and this verse 6 in that chapter. So there are quite a lot of misconceptions about what the Buddha taught about Nirvana. And in Plum Village, Thai has spent quite some time to try and clarify for us exactly what the Buddha taught about Nirvana and what the Buddha didn't teach about Nirvana. And that is why when you look in your 40 tenets, you will find that many of them talk about Nirvana. So you have your tenets with you. You can look at number 3, number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So number 3 to number 8 and number 38. So the first question when we read the sutras that we have to ask is, did the Buddha teach that there is a nirvana with a residue or a remainder, and there is a nirvana without a residue, without a remainder? And that is the fourth tenet, which says nirvana is nirvana. There does not need to be a nirvana with a residue, without a residue. So when we look at this verse, we can see that someone who practices, this true man or true woman, this is a very old Chinese translation. They use the word Chun Nyan, true man, because that is a Taoist expression. And when they started translating from Sanskrit into Chinese in the beginning, they didn't have Buddhist terminology. They have to borrow from the Taoist terminology. So this word, a true man or true woman, is really a Taoist term. I don't know what they used in Sanskrit because I don't have the Sanskrit version. But they may have used the word noble because they often talk about noble. And when they see the word noble in Chinese, they know that noble, it really doesn't mean a noble man or a noble woman. So if you put the word noble, it may lead to a lot of misunderstanding. So then they use the word true. And true man is someone who lives in truth, who lives authentically, who doesn't wear a mask, who doesn't need to wear a mask. And Master Linji, the founder of the Zen lineage, the Linji lineage, you heard about when you received the 14 mindfulness trainings this morning, he also used the word true man or true person, the true person of no position. So someone who is really lives in truth, also lived in nirvana. And that person, it doesn't discriminate whether it's nirvana with a residue or without a residue. And the word residue, we have to ask ourselves, your nirvana doesn't have a residue, or does it have a residue? Like when you have your bottle of wine, you have the residue in the bottom of the dregs. Well, your nirvana, I don't know whether it has a residue or not. But what is it residue of? And this one sutra where the Buddha talks about the residue of suffering. In Nirvana, there's no residue of suffering. So what does Nirvana with a residue mean? Does it mean you can have a Nirvana with a residue of suffering at the same time? So Thai has taught that when you practice, you have some nirvana. There is no way to Nirvana. Nirvana is the way. So when you practice a little bit, you may have 10% Nirvana. You can have a percentage of Nirvana. And so maybe that is what you can mean by when you have percentage of Nirvana, you mean you still have percentage of suffering. So when my mother died, I felt grief, but at the same time, I knew all about the teaching of no birth and no death. And I practiced to look deeply into the no birth and no death nature of my mother. At the same time as I felt the grief. And my looking deeply and was able to hold the grief. So I could feel the grief, but I could also feel that my mother is not really born and did not really die. So the grief was a certain percentage, and the looking deeply in the no birth and no death was also a percentage. So they could both be there at the same time. But there are also times when you experience nirvana and you don't feel the negative, the suffering mental formations at the same time. Like when you practice the walking meditation and you are deeply in touch with the earth, your feet is like the earth is alive. The earth is spirit, and your feet are in touch with that spirit, and you receive all the energy from the earth, and you give back all your energy to the earth. And in that moment, you don't feel any mental afflictions, You can feel deeply the freedom of nirvana. So one thing we have to be aware of is a misunderstanding of what is meant by nirvana with a residue. And then you have to ask, what does this word upadhi mean? Because it says with a residue of upadhi. And upadhi is a philosophical term. It's difficult to understand and is sometimes translated as substratum. Substratum, it means something that is lying underneath, something that is at the root. But upadhi is also connected with the word grasping. So maybe it means that in us we have a very deep tendency to grasp. And so we've already heard about the 5 skandhas. And normally in the sutra, when they talk about the 5 skandhas, they talk about the 5 skandhas of grasping, upadana skandha. So upadana and upadhi, they are linked to each other. They both have to do with grasping. So your 5 skandhas, your body, your feelings, your perception, your mental formation, and your consciousness, they can just be 5 skandhas. You can enjoy them as 5 wonderful skandhas, but they can also be the 5 skandhas of grasping. And what that means is you grasp and you say, this body is mine. This body is I. This body is my self. And this feeling is mine, is I, is myself. And when you grasp like that, you suffer because your body is always changing, your feelings always changing. But if you can just see the 5 skandhas and allow them to be free of I or myself, then you don't have to suffer anymore. So what happened was that people ask, what did the Buddha mean by nirvana without a residue, without a remainder, without upadhi? And they came to the conclusion that what it meant was you have nirvana when you don't have the 5 skandhas. That is when you die. Your body disintegrates, your feelings, they disappear, there are no more 5 skandhas, then there is really the enjoyment of nirvana. So, in order to have a complete nirvana, you have to die. So this is something that we have to remove from the teaching. The Buddha never taught that. Especially when we look at the early teachings of the Buddha is always talking about living in nirvana while you still have your 5 skandhas. Actually, if you didn't have your 5 skandhas, I don't know what it is that would be in touch with nirvana. So in the Discourse on Happiness, it says you live in the world with your heart undisturbed by the world, with all sorrows ended, living in peace. That is the greatest happiness. So that means that it's possible to live in the world and to live in nirvana. And when we listened to Cherry Maple's sharing the other day, she said twice that doing the work she does as a police person, she is able to live in the historical dimension and also touch nirvana at the same time, touch the ultimate dimension at the same time. So now I would like to ask you to look at the 8th tenet. And the 8th tenet says that the concentrations on emptiness, signlessness, and aimlessness help us to touch nirvana and the unconditioned. So, when we talk about emptiness, we always ask ourselves, empty of what? If your teacup is empty, it's empty of something. It's empty of tea. but it's not empty of air. So when we talk about our 5 skandhas, we can say, like we heard in the Heart Sutra this morning, that our 5 skandhas are empty. This body is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is not other than this body. But you have to ask, if this body is empty, what is it empty of? It's very clear there is flesh, skin, bones, blood, all those things are there. So it's not a vacuum. And when we look deeply, we find that what our body is empty of is a separate self. Wherever you look in your body, you cannot find that there is an I or a separate self. In Italy, there was a very hard frost one winter, and it killed the olive trees. And when they cut the top of the olive tree off, there sprung up from the roots, instead of 1 olive tree, there sprung up 2 or 3. And when we look into ourselves and into our brothers and our sisters, we see that we are not a separate self. We come from the same root which is our mother and our father, as our brothers and sisters do. So when our brother dies, our sister dies, they are still there in us. We share the same roots. So we don't have to, if we look deeply like that, we can hold our grief, but we can also hold the non-born and the non-dying nature of our brother. Because our brother who has died, he is there in us. As well as, of course, he is there in his children. So when our brothers and our sisters, our mother and our father are still alive, we look deeply into the emptiness of their body and their feelings in order to touch their empty nature. And then when they die, we don't have to grieve so much. We don't have to feel that we have lost them. When we say that this body is emptiness and emptiness is this body, it's very important that sentence to turn the thing around like that, because we may think that emptiness can exist somewhere out there without a body. You can't have emptiness out there on its own. Emptiness can only be emptiness of something. There has to be something there that is empty. And that is why the Heart Sutra has to remind us that in order to have emptiness, you have to have a body. You have to have feelings. You have to have perceptions. Our perceptions are empty of a separate self. Our perceptions are made up of our past experience. They are made up of different synapses in our brain. They're made up of our eyes, our optic nerve, but they do not have a separate self. And whenever we have a perception of something, we are not being in touch with the reality. You hear a bird singing. The bird don't just fly up in the sky, they also sing very beautifully. If you can touch the song of the bird, then you can you can also touch Nirvana. But you have to touch the emptiness of the song of the bird. The song of the bird is made up of everything that is not that song. It's made up of the bird's ancestors. It's made up of the bird's body. It's made up of the bird's joy. And listening deeply to that song, we can experience emptiness. And then you would say that this song of the bird is emptiness. Emptiness is not other than the song of the bird. Because without the song of the bird, you would not be able to realize the truth of emptiness. So that is, we say that the meditation on emptiness, it helps us to be in touch with Nirvana. And being in touch with Nirvana is being able to be in touch with the truth of the way that things are. And the second concentration, and emptiness is a concentration. Emptiness is not something that you find out there somewhere else. Emptiness is something present in everything, and when you are dwelling in concentration, you can touch the emptiness by looking deeply, by listening deeply. And the concentration on signlessness is the same. The nature of our perception is to grasp at a sign. Whenever we perceive something, we perceive a sign. And we become attached to that sign. That sign, it leads to us having a concept. We become attached to the perception. And where there is a sign, there is a deception. And when you look at a tree, you recognize the tree by means of the sign tree. You see the leaves, and you see the trunk, and you are able to recognize the sign tree. But the tree is not a reality like what you see. They say that things arise in our consciousness from our discriminating mind. In order to be able to see something, to conceive of something, we have to make a discrimination. And the discrimination is that my consciousness is separate from the thing that I am observing. So the sign is what we grasp to as the reality. The people we love or the people we don't love, we also grasp to them by means of a sign. We recognize somebody by means of a sign. We do not see that person is a universe, is a whole cosmos in himself or herself. All we can see is the sign. And that's true whether we love someone or we hate someone. So one good practice that we can do is when we see someone coming towards us, we can say, "Hello, me," because that person is in fact coming from your perception. That person isn't a reality outside of your perception. And sometimes we have a perception of a whole a whole race, that race of people is a certain sign. And we cannot be in touch with the reality of that particular race of people. So racial discrimination is based on being caught in sign. So when someone we love dies, then what we lose is a sign. And if we'd been able to touch that person outside of signs, in a way we call signlessness, then we don't have to lose that person when they die. But we have to lose certain signs. So the concentration on signlessness is something that we can practice in our daily life. The people who are alive, the people we live with, we learn to look at them as a whole universe, a whole cosmos, in order to understand their no-sign nature. So the example that we give in Plum Village is the example of the cloud. The cloud in the sky is water. The cloud is a sign. The cloud you see is a sign. It is impermanent. It doesn't have a separate self. And one day the cloud will disappear from the sky. But when the cloud disappears, another sign appears. That is the sign of the rain. And when the rain stops, another sign disappears and another sign appears. And that is the sign of the river. So if we are caught in the sign that is the cloud, we cannot be in touch with our loved one in the rain or in the river. And so we lose our loved one. And it's also possible to be in touch with our loved one with no sign, without the river sign, without the rain sign, without the cloud sign. And at that point, you just see that your loved one is beyond signs. You can experience your loved one without being caught in any sign. And then in whatever sign your loved one wants to show himself or herself, you can find him or her. So in the Gatha we read when someone has died, we say that life and death, birth and death are only a game of hide and seek. And we have to learn to play that game of hide and seek in order to let go of the sign that we've become attached to, in order to be able to find our loved one in other signs. And the last concentration that we use is the concentration on aimlessness. And the concentration on aimlessness is very much linked to the teaching that the 3 times into are. Because normally when we have an aim, the aim is out there in the future, and we think that it's not there in the present. So with aimlessness, we learn to see that everything is available, everything is present. And in the sutra that you were looking at yesterday, you were able to see that consciousness is not separate from the world outside of you, and that what is appearing as outside of you is also arising in consciousness. And consciousness is impermanent, and all things are impermanent. And therefore these two parts of consciousness, the perceiver and the perceived, they are not two separate realities. And the example that Tai usually gives is better than this thing on the board, is the euro, the coin. And the coin has an obverse and a reverse. But the obverse and the reverse of a coin are not two separate realities. And even better, a piece of paper, the recto and the verso of a piece of paper, you cannot separate them from each other. And that is true of consciousness that perceives and consciousness that is perceived. The thing that is perceived is not other than the thing that is perceiving. And this is, I think, in modern physics, in subatomic particle physics, it's very clear that the nature of the particle you cannot see the nature of the particle as something separate from the one who is perceiving the particle. So science has shown that what the Buddha discovered in meditation is the way things are. So from that point of view, what is there to aim for? Because everything is the past, the present, and the future. Everything is there, available. Yesterday I didn't have to, but I was happy to give someone a consultation in the meditation hall in the Lower Hamlet. And as I was sitting there and following my breathing, I remember all the times in the past when I'd sat there and done consultation. And all those times in the past and the time in the present and the times in the future. And not only had I sat there and done consultation, but many of my fourfold Sangha, a lay Dharma teacher, monk and nun Dharma teacher, they had also sat there and done consultation. So this consultation is not a separate event. It is there in the whole of time and is there in many different people. We're no longer a separate self. So aimlessness is the teaching of there is nothing to attain. You are beautiful just as you are. You have nowhere to go, nothing to do to make yourself more beautiful. And this is also the teaching about Nirvana. Nirvana is not something that we go and out of ourselves and take hold of, grasp somewhere else. Aimlessness in Sanskrit is apranihita. And apranihita means not put in front and grasp. You don't put it in front of you and grasp to it because it's already there. It's already there in the two parts of consciousness, the perceiving part of consciousness and the perceived part of consciousness. And we cannot say that the perceiving part of consciousness is inside and the perceived part of consciousness is outside, because the perceiver and the perceived inter-are. They are both inside and outside. So that is the basis of the teaching on aimlessness. And going along with the word aimlessness, we have another word which comes from the same root, and that word is So this word means aimlessness, not in front grasped. Don't grasp something in front. It's already here, you already have it. And this word, pranithana, it means vow. Vow. I make a vow. Like this morning when you received the 14 mindfulness training, you have to say, do you make the commitment to receive, study, and practice? You say, yes, I do. And that is pranithana. Yes, I do. I mean, I vow. But you have to say to yourself, when I make a vow, is it about the future or is it about the present? It's about the present. It's watering a seed in the present moment. And of course, once you water the seed, if you're a farmer, you know that there will be a sunflower. If you're not a farmer, you didn't plant the seed, you may not know that. So the sunflower doesn't really belong to the future. It belongs to the here and the now. And the important thing about making a vow is how you are in the present moment, not what you're going to do in the future. Because how you are in the present moment is what will determine what you do in the future. So you make a vow in the spirit of aimlessness, dwelling deeply in the present moment. And that is why we say that when you receive the mindfulness trainings, you have to be concentrated, you have to be really there in the present moment. So Nirvana is available in each one of us. It's available. The thing is that we can't touch it most of the time. It's not that it's not there. And the nature of all phenomena is nirvana, like the bird song is nirvana. But not just the bird song is nirvana. We have to say that the cow urine and the buffalo dung, they are also nirvana. And so when we are urinating or defecating, we can also touch our nirvana nature. Here with, he's gone. Mara and Buddha have gone. Now we have defiled and pure. This morning we already chanted that. No purity, no defilement. And we have to, in Nirvana, we don't choose purity over defilement. We see the Nirvana nature of both. Because the flower, it needs the cow urine and the buffalo dung to grow. One master, when he asked a question, he answered like that. Another master, when he was asked the question, Master, where can I find no birth and no death? Where can I find Nirvana? And the master replied, Master Phomvan replied to Master Tien Hoi, to his disciple, you find Nirvana right in the middle of birth and death. So those of us who work with the dying, we find Nirvana in the midst of birth and death. Those of us who work as midwives, we find Nirvana. And I just want to share one more part of the sutra with you, but I think you may be getting a bit bored and sleepy. I asked my sisters to come and sing for us a little bit, if they're available.
Chim chóng nương trời mây, sự vật nương phân biệt mà điều hiền. Các bậc chân nhân nương vào niết bàn để sống thành thơi, sống thành thơi.
So, dear Sangha, in the Udana, the chapter 8, part 3, there is a very important little sutra, and the Buddha said, today I'm going to talk about Nirvana. So I think I better share this with you. And in this sutra it says, monks, there is an unborn, a non-being, an unmade, an unconditioned. if there were not the unborn, the non-being, the unmade, the unconditioned, there would be nowhere for the born, the being, the made, and the conditioned to go back to escape to. What this means is the Buddha had experienced in meditation a level of awareness that go beyond birth and death, being and non-being, doer and done, and the conditioned. So what we all want to do is to be able to experience this in our daily life. So this comes from Udana. Udana means inspired utterances. And when the Buddha is inspired, he speaks in a very concise way that is difficult for us to understand. And we have to read many sutras and experience and have our own meditation experience, and also learn from our teachers. We're very lucky that we have our teacher to learn from, because if we didn't, we'd have to start from scratch, and it would take, we would never do it in this lifetime. So we have the teachings of Thai, which mean we don't have to start from scratch. We start somewhere up here. So you read not born, but not born means also not dying. So really what ajata means is not born and not dying. It means the Buddha has touched something that is not born and doesn't die. And abhuta means not being, but it also means not being, non-being. The Buddha has touched something which is not being and not non-being. It's called the middle way. We talked about it last time. You don't get caught in either the extreme of being or non-being. And these things you cannot talk about in words. In words we can talk about born and dying, but we can't talk about the middle way between them. And akrita means not made. So this means normally we think there is someone who does the action, and the person who does the action receives the fruit of the action. But there is no permanent self. So there is no one who can do an action and receive the action. There's no self there that can receive it. So this very deep level on the when we teach Buddhism, we say that you will get the result of your actions. But in fact, there will be a result of your actions, but there is no one, the same person there to receive them. And the teaching of karma in Buddhism is very different from the teaching of karma in Hinduism, because in Buddhism we do not have that separate self to receive the fruit of the action. When we do something, we are very mindful. We practice the 5 mindfulness trainings, the 14 mindfulness trainings, because we know that every action we do will have a result. Not because we think I'm going to have to suffer if I do this, but because we know that if this action is done, there will be suffering. And this means not conditioned. So we hear a lot about formations. We hear about mental formations. We hear about physical formations. Your mental formations, like your anger, your compassion. Your anger, your compassion, they are made up of many different things. So we call them conditions. So many things have to come together to make your anger. It's not something that just exists as a separate self-entity. Just as so many things have to come together to make the flower. But when we perceive something, we perceive it as a block with a separate self. We perceive our anger as having a separate self. When we are angry, we just perceive anger. We don't see all the things that have made the anger possible. And when we look at the flower, we just see a separate flower. We don't see all the things that have made the flower possible. So in order to be able to touch the non-conditioned, it means not being caught in the sign, but being able to see beyond the sign, that this thing is a wonderful reality made up of everything that is not itself. And that is what we call the non-conditioned. So, all our suffering, it comes from our attachment, ideas of birth and death, of the person who does the action, the person who received the action, our ideas of being and non-being, our idea of formations, without being able to see the non-conditioned nature of formations. And when we can touch that other level, we have an escape from the suffering, and we can touch the peace that is belong to this level. And this is what the Buddha did in his own lifetime, and what the Buddha knows that all of us with the Buddha nature we can also do in our own lifetime. We don't have to wait until we die. And the Buddha used the expression Drishta Dharma Nirvana, Nirvana which is available here and now. With our practice of concentration on the 3 doors of liberation, 3 Dharma seals, it is like a slide. In the park, you get on the top of the slide, the children, and then they slide down. So somehow we need to slide into Nirvana. And we have to ask her, what is our slide? And our slide is the teaching on interbeing, no self, impermanence. And that is the way to touch Nirvana. You can't just touch Nirvana like that. You need to have a slide to go on. So, many sutra about that. About this slide. You can find this on the computer, the Samyukta Agama 293. Somebody translated into English already. And it talks about how you can be in touch with Nirvana, how you can be in touch with emptiness by meditating on the interbeing nature of things. Yeah, maybe that's enough.